They thought tying her shoelaces together would be just another joke. They had no idea they were about to meet a black belt who'd been hiding in plain sight for 2 years. Chen was about to remind them that still waters run deep, and some storms are worth waiting for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog still clung to the windows of Riverside Academy. When Chen stepped through the front doors, her navy backpack slung over one shoulder and her dark hair pulled back in its usual simple ponytail. She moved through the hallways like water flowing around stones, never making waves, never drawing attention, always finding the path of least resistance. To most students rushing past her toward their lockers, she was just another face in the crowd, another quiet kid who kept to herself and minded her own business. But Maya wasn't just quiet by nature. She was quiet by choice, by careful design, by 2 years of practice at being invisible. When her family had moved to Millbrook after her father's military transfer, she'd made a conscious decision to blend in, to be normal, to leave behind the part of herself that could break boards with her bare hands and execute perfect spinning kicks that could drop someone twice her size. Chen had been teaching his daughter TAEKWONDO since she was 7 years old, and by 15, she'd earned her black belt at the Riverside Community Center, where she still trained 3 times a week in secret. The decision to hide her abilities hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. At her old school in San Diego, being known as the martial arts girl had made her a target in different ways. People either wanted to test her, challenge her, or treat her like some kind of weapon. She'd grown tired of the constant questions, the requests for demonstrations, the way people looked at her hands like they were loaded guns. When the opportunity came to start fresh in Oregon, she'd grabbed it, convincing her father to let her train privately while she figured out how to just be a regular teenager for once. Maya had mastered the art of appearing ordinary. She wore oversized hoodies that hid her athletic build, walked with a slight hunch that concealed her perfect posture, and kept her responses short and soft-spoken. She'd learned to let her shoulders droop just enough to suggest someone who'd never thrown a punch in her life, and she'd perfected the art of looking down when she walked, as if she were afraid of making eye contact with anyone who might notice. The strategy had worked mostly. For 2 years, she'd successfully flown under the radar at Riverside Academy, earning decent grades, staying out of drama, and building a small but comfortable life with her best friend Emma Davis, who knew her as just another bookish girl who preferred staying in the library during lunch to dealing with the chaos of the cafeteria. Emma had no idea that Maya spent her evenings perfecting her forms, working on her flexibility, and sparring with advanced students who were often twice her age. But invisible didn't mean safe, and Maya had learned that lesson the hard way over. The past month, it had started small, the way these things always do. Tyler Brooks, the star quarterback with the $1 million smile and the dead eyes, had begun noticing her in the way predators notice prey. He'd started with little comments in passing, calling her Mouse because of how quiet she was, making jokes about whether she ever actually spoke or just communicated through telepathy. Tyler wasn't particularly clever, but he was persistent, and he had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no by anyone who mattered. His best friend Jake Morrison was the follower type, always ready to laugh at Tyler's jokes and escalate whatever game they were playing. Connor Walsh rounded out their trio as the designated comedian, the one who made their cruelty seem like harmless fun by wrapping it in humor and timing. The 3 of them had turned noticing Maya into a hobby. They'd comment on her clothes, her walk, the way she ate her lunch, the books she carried. They'd started sitting near her in the cafeteria, not close enough to be obvious, but close enough that she could hear every word they said about her. They'd perfected the art of making her feel watched, studied, like a specimen under a microscope. Maya had dealt with bullies before, but these 3 were different. They were smart enough to never cross obvious lines, never do anything that would get them in serious trouble, never leave evidence that couldn't be explained away as just joking around. They understood the game better than most, knew how to make someone miserable without technically breaking any rules. She'd tried ignoring them, tried changing her routines, tried eating lunch in Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom instead of the cafeteria. But they'd adapted, found new ways to make her uncomfortable, new opportunities to remind her that they were watching. The worst part wasn't even what they did. It was the way other students pretended not to notice, the way teachers smiled at Tyler's charm offensive while completely missing the malice underneath. Maya had considered telling someone, but what would she say? That 3 popular boys were making her feel uncomfortable? That they looked at her wrong? That they made jokes she didn't find funny? She knew how these conversations went, had seen them play out with other students. The adults would nod sympathetically, maybe have a word with the boys, who would apologize convincingly and then find subtler ways to make her life miserable. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could have ended their harassment in about 30 seconds if she'd wanted to, could have demonstrated exactly why picking on her was a mistake that would leave them nursing bruises and wounded pride. But using her skills would mean exposing herself, would mean becoming the martial arts girl again, would mean losing the normal life she'd worked so hard to build. So she'd endured, told herself it was temporary, convinced herself that graduation was only a year away and she could handle anything for a year. She'd gotten good at avoiding them, at reading their moods, at disappearing into crowds when she sensed they were looking for entertainment. She'd turned invisibility into an art form, perfected the ability to be present but not noticed, there but not available. But as Maya walked through the hallways of Riverside Academy that foggy morning, she had no idea that her carefully constructed world of anonymity was about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. She had no idea that Tyler Brooks had grown bored with subtle harassment and was ready to escalate to something more dramatic, more humiliating, more public. She had no idea that in less than 3 hours her secret would be exposed in front of half the school, and the quiet girl who'd spent 2 years hiding her true nature would finally show everyone exactly what happened when you pushed the wrong person too far. Maya's first period calculus class felt like an endurance test in more ways than one. She sat in her usual spot 3 rows from the back, close enough to the window that she could watch the maintenance crew clearing fallen leaves. From the courtyard, when Mrs. Henderson's monotone explanations of derivatives became unbearable, the seat gave her a clear view of most of the classroom while keeping her back protected. A habit she'd developed without consciously realizing it was a tactical choice. Tyler Brooks sat 4 seats ahead and 1 row to the right, his letterman jacket draped over the back of his chair like a cape. Maya had memorized his schedule by necessity, learned to anticipate where he'd be and when, developed an internal map of safe routes through the school that minimized their interactions. She'd become an expert at reading the back of his head, could tell by the set of his shoulders whether he was in a good mood or looking for trouble. Today his posture suggested restlessness. He kept glancing at the clock, tapping his pen against his desk in an irregular rhythm that made Maya's jaw clench. Jake Morrison sat directly in front of him, occasionally turning around to whisper something that made Tyler's eyes light up with the kind of anticipation that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Maya tried to focus on the equations covering the whiteboard, but her attention kept drifting to the familiar weight of her backpack against her legs. Hidden in the bottom compartment, wrapped in an old tie-shirt, was her dobuk, the traditional TAEKWONDO uniform she'd worn to practice the night before. She'd meant to take it out and wash it, but Emma had called with a crisis about her chemistry homework, and Maya had spent the evening helping her friend instead of doing her own laundry. The fabric felt like a secret pressed against her ankle, a reminder of the life she lived after school hours. Just 12 hours ago, she'd been at the community center, working through advanced forms with Master Kim, her movements precise and powerful, her voice sharp as she counted off techniques. In Korean. The Maya who trained at the dojang bore little resemblance to the girl hunched over her calculus textbook, deliberately making herself small. When the bell rang, Maya waited for the usual exodus before gathering her things. She'd learned that rushing to leave only put her in the crowded hallway at the same time as Tyler and his friends, and crowded hallways provided too many opportunities for accidental contact. Instead, she took her time organizing her notebook, retying her shoelaces, adjusting her backpack straps until the corridor had mostly cleared. Mrs. Henderson was erasing the board when Maya finally stood to leave. The teacher glanced up with the kind of vague recognition that suggested she knew Maya was a good student, but couldn't have picked her out of a lineup. It was exactly the level of visibility Maya preferred from her teachers, enough to avoid negative attention but not enough to be memorable. The hallway stretched ahead of her like a gauntlet. Second period was American history with Mr. Peterson, which meant crossing the main corridor during the busiest part of the morning. Maya adjusted her route automatically, taking the longer path past the art rooms to avoid the area where Tyler's group usually congregated between classes. She'd mapped every alternative route in the school, could navigate from any classroom to any other without using the main thoroughfares. But as she turned the corner near the library, Maya realized her careful planning had been for nothing. Tyler, Jake, and Connor were already there, lounging against the lockers with the casual confidence of people who owned the space. They weren't blocking her path exactly, but they were positioned in a way that made it impossible to pass without acknowledging their presence. Tyler's face broke into that practiced smile when he saw her, the one that looked friendly from a distance but never quite reached his eyes. He'd perfected that expression over years of charming teachers and parents, used it like a weapon to disarm anyone who might question his intentions. Maya had seen him deploy it countless times, watched him talk his way out of trouble with coaches and administrators who wanted to believe that their star player was as good as he appeared. "Morning, Mouse," he said, pushing off from the lockers with exaggerated casualness. "You're looking particularly chatty today. Did you actually make eye contact with someone? I'm impressed." Jake snickered on cue, while Connor made a show of looking around as if searching for evidence of Maya's alleged social interaction. It was a well-rehearsed routine, polished through repetition until each of them knew exactly when to laugh, when to add a comment, when to let Tyler carry the performance. Maya kept walking, her expression neutral, her pace steady. She'd learned not to react to their baiting, understood that any response would only encourage them to escalate. But as she tried to move past them, Tyler shifted his position just enough to force her to either acknowledge him or change direction. "Don't be rude, Mouse," he said, his voice taking on a hurt tone that was completely manufactured. "We're just trying to be friendly. You'd think after 2 years you'd at least say good morning to your classmates." The worst part was that his performance was convincing. To anyone watching from a distance, it would look like 3 popular boys trying to include a shy classmate in conversation while she rudely ignored them. Tyler had mastered the art of making his targets look like the problem, of positioning himself as the victim of their antisocial behavior. Maya finally looked up, meeting his eyes for just a moment before glancing away. It was a calculated gesture, enough to satisfy his need for acknowledgement without giving him the satisfaction of a real reaction. She'd practiced this balance, learned to give just enough to avoid accusations of rudeness while never giving so much that it encouraged further interaction. "There she is," Connor said with fake enthusiasm. "I was starting to think you were mute. Do you actually talk, or do you just communicate through mysterious glances and profound silence?" They were blocking more of the hallway now, not enough to be obvious about it, but enough that Maya would have to ask them to move or squeeze past them awkwardly. She chose a third option, turning toward the water fountain as if that had been her destination all along. It was a strategic retreat disguised as a mundane activity. But Tyler wasn't finished. He followed her to the fountain, standing just close. Enough to invade her personal space without making it obvious to casual observers. Maya could smell his cologne, something expensive and overpowering that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. "You know what I think, Mouse?" he said, his voice dropping to a conversational level that forced her to strain to hear him. "I think you're not actually shy. I think you're just stuck up, too good for the rest of us regular people." Maya finished drinking and straightened up, her face carefully blank. She'd heard variations of this accusation before, understood that. It was designed to provoke her into defending herself, into engaging with their narrative. Instead, she simply nodded politely and started walking toward her classroom. "See?" Tyler said to his friends, his voice loud enough now to carry to other students passing by. "Stuck up. Thinks she's better than everyone else. Too special to talk to normal people." The accusation stung because it was so far from the truth. Maya wasn't avoiding them because she felt superior. She was avoiding them because she recognized danger when she saw it. But explaining that would mean admitting she saw them as a threat, would mean acknowledging that their behavior was affecting her. Jake picked up the thread, his voice taking on a mocking tone. Maybe she's saving her voice for something important. You know, like ordering coffee or asking for directions to the library. Connor laughed too loudly, the sound echoing off the lockers. Or maybe she's practicing for a career in mime. Silent but deadly, you know? The phrase "silent but deadly" hung in the air with deliberate ambiguity, designed to sound innocent while carrying darker implications. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, the first crack in her carefully maintained composure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She could feel other students glancing in their direction, drawn by the sound of Connor's laughter and Tyler's increasingly theatrical performance. This was how it always worked. They'd push and prod until she reacted, then point to her reaction as evidence that she was the problem. If she stayed silent, she was stuck up. If she responded, she was being dramatic. If she walked away, she was rude. They'd constructed a perfect trap, a no-win situation that let them maintain their position as the reasonable ones no matter what she did. Maya reached her classroom door and felt a moment of relief. Mr. Peterson was already at his desk, shuffling through papers with the distracted air of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. The room offered sanctuary, a place where Tyler's group couldn't follow without drawing unwanted attention from an adult. But as she reached for the door handle, Tyler's voice carried across the hallway one last time. "Don't worry, Mouse. We'll catch up with you later. Maybe by then you'll remember how to use your voice." The promise in his words was unmistakable, and Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she stepped into the classroom. She knew that whatever game they were playing was escalating, could sense that their patience with her non-responses was wearing thin. They were getting bolder, more public with their harassment, more willing to risk being noticed by teachers and administrators. As she took her seat and opened her history textbook, Maya tried to push down the growing certainty that her strategy of invisibility was failing. She'd spent 2 years perfecting the art of being overlooked, but Tyler and his friends had made her into a project, a puzzle they were determined to solve. And Maya was beginning to realize that people like Tyler didn't give up easily, didn't lose interest just because their target refused to play along. The morning had barely begun, and already Maya could feel the careful balance she'd maintained for 2 years starting to shift. Something was building, some kind of confrontation that her instincts warned her was coming, whether she wanted it or not. She just hoped that when it finally arrived, she'd be ready for it. The lunch period at Riverside Academy operated on an unspoken but rigid social hierarchy that Maya had learned to navigate like a carefully choreographed dance. The cafeteria stretched across what had once been two separate rooms, connected by a wide archway that created natural divisions between different social groups. Athletes claimed the tables near the windows, their letterman jackets and team colors, creating a visual barrier that warned outsiders to keep their distance. The drama kids occupied the corner near the stage, their animated conversations punctuated by sudden bursts of laughter that echoed off the high ceilings. Maya had found her niche at a small table, tucked behind a structural pillar that provided both privacy and a clear view of the room's entrances. She discovered the spot during her first week at Riverside, drawn by its strategic advantages and the way it seemed to exist in the cafeteria's blind spot. Students passed by without really seeing it. Teachers rarely patrolled the area, and the acoustics were poor enough that conversations stayed private. Emma Davis was already waiting when Maya arrived, her chemistry textbook spread across the table like a protective barrier. Emma had the kind of natural beauty that she seemed completely unaware of, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that sparkled when she laughed. She was one of those people who genuinely liked everyone and assumed everyone liked her back, an optimism that Maya found both endearing and exhausting. "Please tell me you understood the homework," Emma said without looking up from her notebook, "because I'm pretty sure Mr. Wilson is speaking in code. What does calculate the molarity of the solution after adding 50 milliliters of distilled water even mean in human language?" Maya slid into the seat across from her and pulled out her own chemistry notes. She'd always been good at science, found comfort in the predictability of formulas and the logical progression of problem solving. Unlike the chaotic social dynamics of high school, chemistry had rules that made sense, reactions that could be predicted and controlled. "It means you're diluting the solution," Maya explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you add water, you're not changing the amount of solute, just increasing the volume. So if you know the initial concentration and the final volume, you can calculate the new molarity." Emma's face lit up with understanding, and she began scribbling notes in her distinctive looping handwriting. Maya watched her friend work, feeling the familiar warmth of being useful without being noticed. This was the kind of interaction she preferred, quiet and purposeful, focused on solving problems rather than creating drama. The cafeteria around them hummed with the usual lunchtime energy. Conversations rose and fell like waves, punctuated by the clatter of trays and the scrape of chairs against linoleum. Maya had learned to filter out most of the noise, to focus on Emma's questions and her own carefully packed lunch while staying peripherally aware of the room's emotional temperature. She'd brought the same thing she always brought: a turkey sandwich on whole wheat bread, an apple, and a bag of pretzels. Her father had offered to give her money for the cafeteria food, but Maya preferred the control that came with packing her own lunch. She knew exactly what she was eating, could avoid the complicated social dynamics of the lunch line, and didn't have to worry about having enough money or making conversation with the cafeteria staff. "You're like a chemistry wizard," Emma said, looking up from her calculations. "I don't know how you make it look so easy. Do you think you'll major in science when you graduate?" Maya considered the question while opening her sandwich. She'd never talked about her plans with anyone, partly because she wasn't sure what they were, and partly because discussing the future felt like tempting fate. But Emma's genuine curiosity made her want to share something real. "Maybe," she said finally. "I like how science makes sense. You can predict what's going to happen if you understand the rules." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "That's what I love about you. You think about things differently than everyone else. Like, you notice stuff that other people miss." The compliment made Maya uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She'd spent so much energy trying not to be noticed that having someone appreciate her observational skills felt dangerous. But before she could respond, the atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted in a way that made her spine stiffen with alertness. Tyler Brooks had entered the room with his usual entourage, but something about his body language suggested he was looking for something specific. His eyes swept the cafeteria with the focused intensity of a predator who'd caught a scent, and Maya felt her stomach clench when his gaze moved in their direction. She'd developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when Tyler was paying attention to her, could feel his focus like a physical weight across the room. It was a skill born of necessity, honed through months of trying to avoid becoming his next source of entertainment. Today that familiar tension was sharper than usual, charged with an energy that made her want to gather her things and leave immediately. "Maya?" Emma's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maya forced herself to relax, to pretend she was absorbed in her chemistry notes. "I'm fine. Just thinking about the homework." But she wasn't fine. Tyler was moving through the cafeteria with deliberate purpose, Jake and Connor flanking him like bodyguards. They were heading in her direction, weaving between tables with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they owned the entire space. Other students automatically moved out of their way, creating a path that led directly to Maya's carefully chosen sanctuary. Emma was still talking about molarity calculations, her voice bright with enthusiasm for a subject that suddenly seemed completely irrelevant. Maya tried to focus on her friend's words, to lose herself in the familiar comfort of academic discussion. But Tyler's approach was like a storm front moving across the room, impossible to ignore. "Mouse!" Tyler's voice cut through the ambient cafeteria noise like a blade. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." The lie was so casual, so smoothly delivered, that Maya almost believed it herself. But she knew Tyler's patterns, understood that this performance was for the benefit of the other students now watching with curious interest. He was positioning himself as someone who'd been seeking her out for friendly reasons, making her refusal to engage look antisocial. Emma looked up from her textbook with surprise, clearly not understanding the undercurrents of the situation. "Oh, hi, Tyler. Are you in our chemistry class? I don't think I've seen you there." Tyler's smile was blinding as he focused on Emma, his charm turned up to maximum effectiveness. "Different period, but I've heard you're both really smart. Maybe you could help me with something." Maya felt the familiar trap closing around her. Tyler was using Emma as a buffer, making it impossible for Maya to simply ignore him without appearing rude to her friend. It was a sophisticated manipulation, the kind of social chess move that Tyler had perfected through years of getting what he wanted from people who didn't realize they were being played. "What do you need help with?" Emma asked, her natural helpfulness overriding any sense of caution. She was already moving her books to make room, assuming this was a normal request from a classmate who needed academic assistance. Jake and Connor had positioned themselves at the edges of the interaction, not quite sitting down, but not standing far enough away to give the impression they were leaving. Maya recognized the formation, had seen them use it before when they wanted to control a conversation without making it obvious they were surrounding someone. "Actually," Tyler said, his attention shifting to Maya with laser focus, "I was hoping to talk to Mouse here. We're in calculus together, and I'm having trouble with derivatives. I figured since she's so smart and quiet, she might be able to explain it in a way that makes sense." The request sounded reasonable, even admirable. Tyler was acknowledging Maya's intelligence, asking for help with a legitimate academic subject, behaving exactly like a student who genuinely needed assistance. But Maya could hear the undercurrents in his voice, could see the anticipation in Jake and Connor's expressions. "I don't really understand calculus that well," Maya said quietly, her eyes fixed on her sandwich. "You should ask Mrs. Henderson for help during office hours." "Come on, Mouse," Tyler said, his voice taking on a slightly hurt tone. "Don't be modest. Everyone knows you're one of the smartest kids in the class. I'm just asking for a little help between classmates." Emma was looking back and forth between them, clearly sensing tension she didn't understand. Maya could see her friend trying to process the interaction, probably wondering why Maya was being so unhelpful when someone was asking for legitimate assistance. Maybe you could just explain the basic concept? Emma suggested, her voice careful but encouraging. I mean, if you understand it and Tyler needs help. Maya felt cornered by her friend's well-meaning intervention. Refusing to help now would make her look petty and antisocial, would confirm Tyler's narrative that she thought she was too good for her classmates. But agreeing to help would mean engaging with him, would give him the opening he was looking for. The basic concept is that derivatives measure the rate of change, Maya said finally, her voice so quiet that Tyler had to lean closer to hear her. If you have a function, the derivative tells you how fast it's changing at any given point. Tyler nodded as if he were genuinely absorbing the information, but Maya could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He'd gotten her to talk, had drawn her into the conversation despite her obvious reluctance. It was a small victory, but Maya knew from experience that Tyler built his campaigns one small victory at a time. That's helpful, he said, settling more comfortably into the space near their table. But I'm still having trouble with the actual calculations. Like, how do you find the derivative of something complicated? Jake and Connor were grinning now, recognizing that Tyler had successfully engaged his target. Maya realized with growing dread that this wasn't going to be a brief interaction, that Tyler was prepared to draw this out for as long as possible. She was trapped between her desire to help Emma understand that something was wrong and her need to avoid giving Tyler any more ammunition to use against her. The cafeteria around them continued its normal rhythm, but Maya felt like she was sitting in the eye of a storm that was about to break. Tyler's questions were getting more detailed, more focused, requiring longer explanations that forced her to speak above a whisper. With each response, she could feel herself being drawn deeper into exactly the kind of interaction she'd spent 2 years avoiding. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was warning her that this was just the beginning. Tyler's calculus questions grew increasingly elaborate as the lunch period stretched on, each query building on the last in a way that suggested he'd prepared for this conversation. Maya found herself trapped in an academic discussion that felt more like an interrogation, her brief responses expanding despite her best efforts to keep them minimal. Emma watched the exchange with growing confusion, clearly sensing undercurrents she couldn't interpret. So if you're finding the derivative of x squared plus 3x, Tyler continued, pulling out a notebook that looked suspiciously pristine for someone who claimed to be struggling with the material, you'd get 2x plus 3, right? But what if there's a more complicated function embedded in there? Maya's jaw tightened as she recognized the manipulation. The questions were designed to demonstrate her knowledge while positioning Tyler as someone genuinely seeking help, creating a narrative where her reluctance to engage made her appear selfish rather than cautious. She glanced around the cafeteria, noting how other students had begun to notice their interaction, drawn by the unusual sight of Tyler Brooks having an extended conversation with the quiet girl who usually ate alone. Chain rule, Maya said tersely, hoping brevity would discourage further questioning. You take the derivative of the outside function, then multiply by the derivative of the inside function. Tyler nodded enthusiastically, scribbling notes that Maya suspected he'd never look at again. That's brilliant. See, this is why I knew you'd be able to explain it better than Mrs. Henderson. You have this way of breaking things down that makes sense. The compliment felt like a trap, delivered with enough sincerity to make Emma smile approvingly while carrying undertones that made Maya's skin crawl. She'd seen Tyler deploy this technique before, building up his targets with praise that felt genuine until it wasn't, creating a false sense of security that made the eventual humiliation more devastating. Connor shifted closer, his presence adding weight to the conversation. You're really good at this stuff, aren't you? I bet you could help me with physics too. We're doing this unit on momentum energy that's completely over my head. Maya, felt the walls closing in as more requests materialized. This was how it always worked with Tyler's group. They'd identify something they could exploit, then push until they'd extracted maximum value. Her knowledge was just another resource to be mined, her reluctance to share it another weakness to be manipulated. "I'm not that good at physics," Maya said, her voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. She started gathering her things, hoping to signal that lunch was over for her, regardless of how much time remained. "Don't be modest," Jake chimed in, his tone friendly but his eyes calculating. "I've seen your test scores when Mr. Patterson hands them back. You're like a walking textbook." The observation made Maya's stomach drop. She'd been careful about her grades, tried to excel without drawing attention, but apparently her efforts at invisibility had been less successful than she'd believed. The realization that they'd been watching her, cataloging her strengths and weaknesses, made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with academic performance. Emma was looking at her with new interest, clearly impressed by the recognition of her friend's abilities. "Maya, I had no idea you were doing so well in all your classes. You never talk about your grades." "Because they're not important," Maya said, standing up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the linoleum with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly focused silence around their table. Tyler's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the friendly mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath. "Come on, Mouse, don't be like that. We're all just trying to learn from each other here. Isn't that what school's about?" The nickname landed like a slap, delivered with enough casual cruelty to make Maya flinch despite her efforts to remain composed. She saw Emma's face change as she began to understand that this interaction wasn't as innocent as it appeared, that the dynamic she'd stumbled into had history and complications she hadn't recognized. "I have to go," Maya said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "I need to get to the library before next period." "Wait," Tyler said, rising from his seat with fluid grace. "I was hoping you could help me understand something else. It's about the homework from yesterday, the one about related rates." Maya paused despite herself, caught between her desire to escape and her ingrained instinct to help when someone claimed to need academic assistance. Tyler had chosen his moment perfectly, using her own helpful nature against her at the exact moment when walking away would seem most unreasonable. "I really don't have time," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The excuse sounded weak even to her own ears, and she could see Tyler recognize her wavering resolve. "It would just take a minute," he pressed, his voice taking on a pleading quality that was entirely performative. "I've got a test tomorrow, and I'm really struggling with this concept. You'd be doing me a huge favor." Emma was looking between them with obvious discomfort, clearly wanting to help her friend, but uncertain about the dynamics at play. Maya could see her trying to process Tyler's behavior, looking for signs of the menace that Maya felt radiating from him like heat from a fire. "Maybe you could just quickly explain it?" Emma suggested hesitantly. "I mean, if Tyler really needs help for a test tomorrow." Maya felt betrayed by her friend's intervention, even though she knew Emma was trying to be helpful. But Emma didn't understand the game being played, didn't recognize that Tyler's desperation was manufactured, that his academic struggles were a fiction designed to manipulate her into compliance. "Related rates are when you have two variables that are changing with respect to time," Maya said finally, her voice flat with resignation. "You use the chain rule to find how fast one variable is changing based on how fast the other one is changing." Tyler leaned forward as if hanging on every word, his performance so convincing that Maya might have believed it herself if she hadn't seen the calculation in his eyes. "Can you give me an example? Something concrete that I can wrap my head around?" Maya glanced at the clock above the cafeteria entrance, noting that they still had 15 minutes left in the lunch period. 15 minutes felt like an eternity when every second stretched under Tyler's focused attention. when every word she spoke felt like ammunition being handed to someone who would inevitably use it against her. "A ladder sliding down a wall," she said reluctantly. "If you know how fast the bottom of the ladder is moving away from the wall, you can calculate how fast the top is sliding down. That's perfect," Tyler exclaimed, his enthusiasm so genuine seeming that other students began to take notice. "You're amazing at this. I wish all my teachers could explain things as clearly as you do." The praise felt like acid on Maya's skin, each compliment designed to make her feel guilty for wanting to escape, to make her appear ungrateful for Tyler's attention. She could see the trap being constructed around her, each friendly interaction adding another bar to the cage. Connor pulled out his phone, ostensibly to check the time, but actually to take a photo of the equation Maya had absently sketched on a napkin while explaining the concept. The gesture was so quick and casual that Maya almost missed it, but the click of the camera was unmistakable. "Did you just take a picture of my notes?" Maya asked, her voice sharp with the first real anger she'd allowed herself to express. Connor looked up with exaggerated innocence. "Just wanted to remember the explanation. You described it so well, I thought I might need to reference it later." The lie was smooth and reasonable, the kind of explanation that would satisfy any adult who might question the behavior. But Maya knew better, understood that the photo was evidence of her cooperation, proof that she'd been willing to help Tyler with his homework, despite her supposed antisocial tendencies. "Delete it," she said, her voice carrying an edge that made Emma look at her with surprise. "Why?" Jake asked, his tone perfectly reasonable. "It's just a math problem. What's the big deal?" Maya stared at him, recognizing the challenge in his question. If she couldn't explain why the photo bothered her without sounding paranoid, then her objection would seem unreasonable. But she knew that photo would be used somehow, that Connor didn't take pictures of homework explanations for innocent reasons. "Just delete it," she repeated, her voice quieter but more intense. Tyler watched the exchange with obvious satisfaction, clearly enjoying Maya's discomfort. "Connor, if it bothers her, just delete it. We don't want to make Mouse uncomfortable." The fake reasonableness of his tone made Maya's hands clench into fists. Tyler was positioning himself as the mature one, the peacemaker who was willing to accommodate her unreasonable demands. Connor made a show of deleting the photo, his finger movements exaggerated so everyone could see his compliance. "There," Connor said with mock solemnity, crisis averted. "Though I have to say, I've never met anyone so protective of basic calculus before." The observation hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rise in her cheeks. She was overreacting, making a scene over something trivial, proving Tyler's point that she was antisocial and paranoid. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just given them exactly what they wanted, that her cooperation had been noted and cataloged for future use. "I really do have to go," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. She started walking away without waiting for a response, desperate to escape the suffocating attention of Tyler's group. "Thanks for the help, Mouse," Tyler called after her, his voice carrying just far enough for other students to hear. "I really appreciate you taking the time to explain everything so clearly." Maya didn't turn around, but she could hear the satisfaction in his voice, could picture the smug expression on his face. She'd played right into his hands, given him exactly the kind of interaction he'd been seeking, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. As she pushed through the cafeteria doors, Maya caught a glimpse of Emma still sitting at their table, looking confused and slightly hurt by her friend's abrupt departure. The guilt that image caused was almost worse than Tyler's manipulation, another reminder that her efforts to protect herself inevitably hurt the people she cared about. The hallway outside the cafeteria felt like a sanctuary, empty and quiet, after the intensity of the lunch period. But Maya knew the peace was temporary, that Tyler's attention had been aroused rather than satisfied by their interaction. She'd given him a taste of compliance, and people like Tyler always came back for more. The gymnasium at Riverside Academy smelled like industrial disinfectant and teenage anxiety, a combination that had become as familiar to Maya as her own reflection. Fifth period physical education was supposed to be a break from academic pressure. But for Maya, it represented something far more dangerous than pop quizzes or homework assignments. The wide open space, the casual supervision, the emphasis on physical competition, everything about gym class, created opportunities for the kind of harassment that could escalate beyond words. Maya changed into her regulation P uniform in the furthest corner of the locker room, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to minimize her exposure to unwanted attention. The navy blue shorts and gray t-shirt were deliberately oversized, chosen to hide the lean muscle definition that 2 years of dedicated martial arts training had built beneath her carefully constructed facade of ordinariness she'd developed. A routine for dressing that involved strategic positioning and precise timing, ensuring she was never vulnerable when Tyler's group might be nearby. The locker room buzzed with the usual pre-class energy, conversations flowing between the rows of metal compartments about weekend plans, relationship drama, and the upcoming homecoming dance. Maya listened without participating, filing away information that might prove useful while keeping her own thoughts carefully guarded. She'd learned that silence was often mistaken for disinterest, that most people would eventually stop trying to include someone who never contributed to conversations. But today the atmosphere felt different, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation that made Maya's trained instincts prickle with warning. She could hear Tyler's voice echoing from the other end of the locker room, his tone carrying the kind of excitement that suggested he'd found a new source of entertainment. The sound made her movements more deliberate, her awareness heightened, to the point where she could track multiple conversations simultaneously, while appearing completely absorbed in tying her sneakers. "Today we're doing partner exercises," Coach Peterson announced as the class assembled on the polished hardwood floor. He was a compact man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested decades of dealing with teenage reluctance toward physical activity. "I want you to find someone roughly your size and strength level. We'll be working on basic self-defense techniques." Maya's stomach dropped at the announcement. Self-defense training meant close physical contact, structured situations where students were expected to practice techniques on each other, opportunities for accidental injuries that wouldn't look suspicious to supervising adults. She glanced around the gymnasium, calculating potential partners who might be safe, trying to identify someone who would follow instructions without using the exercise as an excuse for inappropriate contact. Emma was in a different pay period, leaving Maya without her usual ally in uncomfortable situations. The other girls in the class had already begun pairing off, gravitating toward friends and social equals with the kind of natural selection that left outliers like Maya standing alone. She could feel the familiar isolation closing in, the sensation of being the last person chosen that had followed her through years of team sports and group activities. "Looks like Mouse doesn't have a partner." Tyler's voice cut through the general chatter like a blade. He was standing with Jake and Connor, all three of them already paired off in a neat triangle that excluded everyone else. "That's too bad. Self-defense is probably something she really needs to learn." The comment was delivered with just enough concern to sound helpful while carrying undertones that made Maya's skin crawl. She could see Coach Peterson scanning the class, looking for unpaired students with the kind of distracted efficiency that suggested he'd rather be coaching football than teaching pay. "Chen," Coach Peterson called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant compliance. "Partner up with Brooks. You're about the same size." Maya felt the world tilt sideways as Tyler's smile widened with predatory satisfaction. The coach had just handed her directly to her tormentor, creating a situation where Tyler would have legitimate reasons to put his hands on her, where any resistance she showed would be interpreted as unwillingness to participate. In class activities. Great, Tyler said, approaching with the easy confidence of someone who'd just been given exactly what he wanted. This should be fun. I promise I'll be gentle. The last word was delivered with just enough emphasis to make Maya's blood run. Cold, she could see Jake and Connor watching from their positions across the gym, their expressions suggesting they were in on whatever Tyler had planned. The three of them had clearly orchestrated this moment, used their knowledge of Coach Peterson's teaching style to engineer a situation where Maya would be completely at their mercy. Today we're starting with basic escapes, Coach Peterson explained, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. One partner will grab the other's wrist, and the defender will practice the proper technique for breaking free. Remember, this is about learning proper form, not about strength. Maya stood frozen as Tyler positioned himself in front of her, his hands hanging loose at his sides in a posture that looked relaxed, but felt threatening. She could smell his cologne, see the calculation in his eyes as he prepared to take advantage of the situation Coach Peterson had unknowingly created. You ready, Mouse? Tyler asked, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. This is going to be educational for both of us. Maya nodded reluctantly, extending her arm as Coach Peterson had demonstrated. Tyler's hand closed around her wrist with deliberate slowness, his grip firm enough to be controlling without being obviously excessive. To anyone watching from across the gym, it would look like a normal training exercise, two students practicing techniques that might someday save their lives. But Maya could feel the malice in Tyler's touch, the way his fingers pressed against her pulse point with just enough pressure to be uncomfortable. His thumb traced across her wrist bone with movements that were clearly deliberate, designed to make her squirm while maintaining the pretense of following instructions. Now twist your wrist toward my thumb, Maya said quietly, reciting the technique Coach Peterson had just demonstrated. That's the weakest part of the grip. Tyler's smile widened as he tightened his hold instead of allowing her to escape. Like this? He asked, his voice innocent enough to fool any casual observer. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. Maya felt panic rising in her chest as Tyler's grip became genuinely painful, his fingers digging into her wrist with enough force to leave marks. She could see Coach Peterson across the gym, helping another pair of students, completely unaware of what was happening in his peripheral vision. You're supposed to let go, Maya said, her voice tight with controlled fear. The exercise is about learning to escape, not about holding on. But I want to make sure you really understand the technique, Tyler replied, his grip shifting to include more of her forearm. Practice makes perfect, right? Maybe we should try it a few more times. Maya's trained instincts screamed at her to react, to use the techniques her father had drilled into her since childhood. Tyler's grip was strong but predictable, his stance overconfident, his attention focused on her discomfort rather than protecting himself. She could have him on the ground in seconds, could demonstrate exactly why grabbing her was a mistake that would leave him nursing injuries and wounded pride. But using her real abilities would mean exposing herself, would mean becoming the martial arts girl again, would mean losing the normal life she'd worked so hard to build. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was allowing herself to be victimized by someone she could easily defeat, trapped by her own desire to remain invisible. Switch positions, Coach Peterson called out, his voice carrying across the gym. Defenders become attackers, attackers become defenders. Remember, this is about control, not force. Maya felt a moment of relief as Tyler reluctantly released her wrist, but it was short-lived. Now she was supposed to grab him, to put herself in the position of initiator while he played the victim. The role reversal felt like another layer of manipulation, another way for Tyler to control the narrative of their interaction. Your turn, Mouse, Tyler said, extending his arm with exaggerated helpfulness. Don't be afraid to really grab on, I can handle it. Maya's hand trembled. As she reached for Tyler's wrist, her fingers barely making contact with his skin. She could feel his pulse beneath her palm, strong and steady, completely unaffected by the fear that was making her own heart race. The contrast between his calm confidence and her visible anxiety was exactly what he'd wanted, proof that she was weak while he was strong. "Come on," Tyler said, his voice taking on a coaching tone that was designed to sound helpful while actually being humiliating. "You need to really grab me if you want this to work. Like this." Without warning, Tyler's free hand shot out and clamped down on Maya's wrist, demonstrating the grip she was supposed to be using on him. His fingers found the exact spots he'd been pressing earlier, applying pressure that made her gasp despite her efforts to remain composed. "See?" Tyler said, his voice loud enough for nearby students to hear. "That's how you do it. You can't be afraid to really take hold of someone. Self-defense isn't about being polite." Maya tried to pull away, but Tyler's grip was implacable, his fingers like iron bands around her wrist. She could see other students beginning to notice their interaction, drawn by Tyler's raised voice and her obvious discomfort. The attention made everything worse, created an audience for her humiliation while providing Tyler with witnesses to his apparent helpfulness. "Let go," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand the technique now." "But you're not doing it right," Tyler insisted, his grip tightening further. "Coach Peterson said this is about learning proper form. I'm just trying to help you understand what real resistance feels like." Maya's vision began to tunnel as panic overtook her rational thought. Tyler's grip was cutting off circulation. To her hand, his fingers grinding against the small bones in her wrist with increasing pressure. She could feel her martial arts training trying to assert itself, muscle memory demanding that she react to the threat with overwhelming force. "Brooks," Coach Peterson's voice cut through the haze of Maya's growing panic. "What's the holdup over there? You should have switched positions by now." Tyler immediately released Maya's wrist, his expression shifting to one of innocent confusion. "Sorry, Coach. I was just trying to help her understand the proper grip. She was being too gentle, and I wanted to make sure she got the real experience." The explanation was perfectly reasonable, the kind of helpful intervention that would earn Tyler praise rather than censure. Maya rubbed her wrist, trying to restore feeling to her fingers while fighting back tears of frustration and rage. She could see the red marks Tyler's grip had left, evidence of his aggression that would fade long before anyone thought to look for it. "Well, move along then," Coach Peterson said, his attention already shifting to another pair of students. "We've got a lot of techniques to cover today." Maya stood frozen in place, her wrist throbbing with pain and her mind reeling from the realization that Tyler had just assaulted her in front of a teacher and gotten away with it. The casual dismissal of her obvious distress, the way Tyler's aggression had been reframed as helpful instruction, the complete lack of consequences for his behavior, it all combined to create a sense of hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm her completely. "Ready to try again?" Tyler asked, his voice carrying false concern. "I promise I'll be more careful this time. We both learned something from that experience." Maya looked at him, seeing the satisfaction in his eyes, the way he was savoring her defeat. This had been his plan all along, to use the structure of the class to hurt her while maintaining plausible deniability, to demonstrate his power over her in a way that would be impossible to report or punish. But as Maya stood there, feeling the ache in her wrist and the burn of humiliation in her cheeks, something deep inside her began to shift. The careful control she'd maintained for 2 years was starting to crack, not from weakness but from the sheer force of the anger that had been building beneath her surface calm. Tyler had pushed too far, had crossed a line that she'd never allowed anyone to cross before. "Actually," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind, "I think I need to go to the nurse. My wrist is really sore." Tyler's expression flickered with annoyance at her attempt to escape. But he couldn't object without revealing his own role in her injury. "That's too bad," he said, his voice carrying false sympathy. "I was really looking forward to practicing with you. Maybe next time we can work on some more advanced techniques." The threat in his words was unmistakable, a promise that this was just the beginning of whatever game he'd decided to play. Maya nodded silently and began walking toward the gym exit, her movements careful and controlled despite the storm raging inside her. As she reached the door, Maya heard Tyler's voice behind her, pitched just loud enough for her to hear. "Don't worry, Mouse. I'll save your spot for when you get back." Maya pushed through the door and into the empty hallway, her composure finally cracking as the weight of what had just happened hit her fully. Tyler had humiliated her in front of her classmates, had physically hurt her under the guise of helping her learn, had demonstrated that he could hurt her any time he wanted while maintaining his reputation as a helpful, popular student. But as Maya stood in the hallway, cradling her injured wrist and fighting back tears of rage, she made a decision that would change everything. She was done being Tyler's victim, done allowing him to use her desire for normalcy against her, done pretending. That invisibility was the same thing as safety. The quiet girl who'd spent 2 years hiding her true nature was about to remind everyone that still waters don't just run deep, sometimes they run dangerous. And Tyler Brooks was about to learn that some mistakes carry consequences that no amount of charm or social status can erase. Maya walked toward the nurse's office with steady steps, her mind already planning what would happen when she returned to class. The mouse was about to show everyone that it had teeth, and Tyler was going to discover that some prey fight back harder than predators ever expect. The storm that had been building inside Maya Chen for 2 years was about to break, and when it did, nothing at Riverside Academy would ever be the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.